The most dangerous promises are the ones that sound reasonable when your heart is already broken. That was the thought running through my mind the night I signed a marriage contract with Damian Sterling. Outside the attorney's office, Manhattan glittered beneath a cold winter sky. Yellow taxi lights streamed through the streets below. People hurried toward restaurants, meetings, and lives that still made sense. Mine had stopped making sense 3 months earlier. My father had passed away unexpectedly, leaving behind debts I never knew existed. Every week brought another notice, another bill, another reminder that the small dance studio I loved was slowly slipping away. I had spent years teaching children how to move with confidence, how to trust the music, how to believe they belonged on the stage. Yet I could not find a way to save the place that meant everything to me. Then Damian Sterling appeared. Everyone in New York knew his name. Newspapers called him brilliant. Investors called him untouchable. Employees spoke about him with a mixture of admiration and caution. He owned companies across the country. Entire industries seemed to shift whenever he made a decision. Men like Damian existed in magazines and business journals, not in ordinary lives like mine. Yet there he was, sitting across from me in a perfectly tailored dark suit, reviewing a contract that would change both of our futures. The office was silent except for the ticking of a wall clock. Damian signed the final page first. His handwriting was precise and controlled. Everything about him seemed controlled. Even the way he breathed. The lawyer slid the papers toward me. My hand hesitated above the signature line. This was not a love story. It was an agreement. A solution. A lifeline. I reminded myself of that several times before writing my name. When the pen left the paper, the lawyer smiled politely and began gathering documents. Damian simply stood. "The car is waiting downstairs," he said. That was it. No congratulations. No celebration. Just a statement. I followed him into the elevator. The ride down felt strangely long. We stood side by side without speaking. His reflection stared back at me from the polished metal walls. Calm. Distant. Impossible to read. The private car carried us through the city toward his estate overlooking the Hudson River. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Streetlights blurred into streaks of gold. I kept waiting for reality to catch up with me. It never did. Nearly an hour later, the gates opened. The estate looked more like a luxury hotel than a home. Warm lights glowed from enormous windows. Stone pathways curved through perfectly maintained gardens. The front doors opened before we reached them. Staff members greeted Damian immediately. Every person seemed to know exactly what to do before he spoke. Power followed him everywhere. Inside, the house felt elegant rather than extravagant, quiet rather than showy. Damian led me toward a staircase before stopping in the center of the grand foyer. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at me. His gray eyes were steady, serious, almost warning me. There is something you need to understand. The atmosphere shifted instantly. My heartbeat quickened. What is it? He held my gaze for several seconds before answering. You may be my wife on paper. His voice remained calm, controlled, unemotional. But do not make the mistake of loving me. Then he turned and walked away. And for some reason, watching him disappear up the staircase hurt far more than it should have. The next morning, I woke up expecting to feel like an intruder. Instead, I felt lost. The bedroom assigned to me was larger than my entire apartment had been. Morning sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. The view should have been breathtaking. Yet all I could think about was Damian's warning from the night before. Do not make the mistake of loving me. I had replayed those words countless times before falling asleep. Not because they offended me, because they sounded practiced. Like something he had told himself long before he ever said it to me. I pushed the thought away and got dressed. The house was quiet when I entered the dining room. A long table stretched beneath elegant lighting fixtures. Fresh flowers sat in the center. White roses. The scent immediately reminded me of the studio my father and I had worked so hard to build. For a moment, homesickness tightened around my chest. Then I noticed breakfast had already been prepared. Fresh fruit, coffee, toast, everything arranged perfectly. Yet the chair at the head of the table sat empty. Damian was already gone. One of the staff members approached with a polite smile. Mr. Sterling left for the office at 6 this morning. I glanced at the clock. It was barely 8. Does he always leave that early? The woman nodded. Every day. The answer somehow fit. Damien seemed like the type of man who never stopped moving, never stopped working, never stopped carrying responsibilities nobody else could see. After breakfast, I decided to explore the estate. The property was enormous. Stone walkways curved through carefully maintained gardens. A small greenhouse stood near the edge of the grounds. Drawn by curiosity, I stepped inside. Warm air immediately wrapped around me. My breath caught. Flowers filled every corner of the space. Orchids, lilies, hydrangeas, roses, hundreds of varieties carefully arranged beneath glass ceilings. I slowly walked through the rows, unable to hide my smile. For the first time since arriving, I felt relaxed, peaceful. Then I noticed something strange. A gardening journal rested on a nearby work table. When I opened it, I found detailed notes about flower care, seasonal growth patterns, and planting schedules. The handwriting looked neat and precise. Familiar somehow. Before I could think more about it, footsteps approached. I turned to find an older groundskeeper entering the greenhouse. He smiled warmly. Beautiful, is it not? I nodded. It is incredible. Damien must enjoy gardening. The man laughed softly. Mr. Sterling? He seemed genuinely amused by the idea. No. He had this greenhouse expanded because he heard you liked flowers. My heart skipped. Me. The groundskeeper looked surprised. As if he had not realized he was revealing something. I assumed you knew. He quickly excused himself and left before I could ask more questions. I stood there alone among the flowers, staring at the journal in my hands. The greenhouse suddenly felt different, more personal, more intentional. That evening, Damien returned shortly after sunset. I found him in the library reviewing documents beside a crackling fireplace. The warm light softened the sharp angles of his face. For a moment he looked less like a CEO and more like a man carrying too many thoughts. How was your day? The question surprised me. He barely looked up from his papers. Productive. I hesitated. I visited the greenhouse. His pen stopped moving. The reaction lasted only a second, but I noticed it. Slowly he lifted his eyes toward me. The room seemed quieter than before. Then he asked a question that made my pulse quicken. Did you like it? As if my answer mattered far more than it should have. As if my answer mattered far more than it should have. The question lingered in the library while the fire crackled softly beside us. I looked at Damien across the room. He had returned his attention to the documents in front of him, yet something about his posture told me he was waiting. Not politely, genuinely. I loved it, I finally said. A strange expression crossed his face. It disappeared so quickly I almost missed it. Relief. The realization unsettled me. Why would my opinion of a greenhouse matter to a man who managed billion-dollar companies? Damien nodded once before returning to work. The conversation should have ended there. Instead, I found myself watching him. The firelight reflected across the shelves behind him. He looked exactly the way people described him in interviews. Controlled, disciplined, untouchable. Yet small contradictions kept appearing. The greenhouse, the flowers, the breakfast. None of those things matched the cold warning he had given me on my first night. Over the next several weeks, I began noticing even more contradictions. Damien rarely spoke about personal matters. Most mornings, he left before sunrise. Most evenings, he returned long after dark. Yet somehow he always knew when something was wrong. One rainy afternoon, my car refused to start outside the dance studio. I stood in the parking lot trying to contact roadside assistance while cold rain soaked through my coat. 20 minutes later, a black luxury sedan pulled up beside me. I stared in disbelief as Damien stepped out holding an umbrella. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He opened the umbrella above my head before answering. "Your assistant called." I did not ask her to. I know. The rain tapped softly against the umbrella. Damien handed me a dry towel from the car. "You looked cold." That was all. No dramatic speech. No attempt to impress me. Just a simple observation. Yet the gesture stayed with me for days. A week later, One of the parents at the studio mentioned that the landlord had suddenly agreed to postpone a rent increase that would have forced us to reduce classes. The news saved us thousands of dollars. When I asked how it happened, nobody knew. Later that evening, I found paperwork sitting on Damien's desk while delivering coffee to his office. The landlord's company name appeared at the top of one document. My heartbeat quickened. Damien quietly closed the folder before I could read more. Neither of us mentioned it. Another time, I forgot my lunch before leaving for work. At noon, a delivery arrived. My favorite soup, my favorite tea, my favorite sandwich. There was no note attached. There did not need to be. Slowly, I started understanding something important about Damien Sterling. He never expressed care through words. He expressed it through solutions, through protection, through actions nobody asked him to take. Yet every time I got close to recognizing that truth, he rebuilt the distance between us. One evening, we attended a corporate dinner together. Executives filled a ballroom overlooking the city. Damien spent most of the night discussing business with investors while I spoke with guests. At one point, an older woman smiled knowingly and asked how long we had been in love. Before I could answer, Damien appeared beside me. "We are not in love." The response came instantly. Smoothly. Practiced. The woman looked embarrassed. I felt something twist inside my chest. Not because of what he said. Because of how quickly he said it. Later that night, we rode home in silence. City lights flashed beyond the windows. Neither of us spoke. Then, just as the car crossed the bridge toward the estate, Damien finally looked at me. His expression remained unreadable, but his next words made my pulse quicken. "You will need a formal gown next week." I frowned. "For what?" He held my gaze for several seconds before answering. "The Sterling Foundation Gala." Then he looked away toward the city lights. "And every influential man in New York will be there." And every influential man in New York would be there. The statement stayed with me throughout the entire week. Not because of the gala itself. Because of the way Damien had said it. Most people would have mentioned the charity, the guests, or the media attention. Damien had mentioned the men. The details seemed insignificant at first. Yet I found myself thinking about it more than I should have. By Friday evening, the estate had transformed into a whirlwind of preparation. Stylists arrived shortly after noon. Garment bags filled one of the guest rooms. Jewelry boxes appeared on tables. Staff members moved through the halls with quiet efficiency. Everything felt larger than life. By sunset, I stood in front of a mirror staring at a woman I barely recognized. The gown was elegant and understated. Midnight blue silk flowed to the floor. The color made my eyes appear brighter. My hair rested in soft waves around my shoulders. For a moment I simply stared. The girl who spent most days teaching dance classes and organizing recitals seemed very far away. A knock sounded at the door. When I turned around, Damien stood in the doorway. He wore a black tuxedo tailored so perfectly it looked effortless. The room suddenly felt smaller. Neither of us spoke immediately. His gaze settled on me. For once, the confident businessman seemed unable to find words. The silence stretched longer than expected. Then he cleared his throat. "The car is ready." That was all. Yet something in his voice felt different. The drive into Manhattan passed quietly. City lights reflected against the windows while traffic flowed beneath the evening sky. When we arrived at the gala venue, photographers lined the entrance. The building itself resembled a palace more than a ballroom. Crystal chandeliers glowed behind. Towering glass doors. Luxury cars arrived one after another. Powerful people stepped onto the red carpet. Yet the moment Damien exited the vehicle, everything changed. Cameras immediately shifted toward him. Conversations paused. Even the photographers seemed more focused. Power had a presence. Damien carried it naturally. The moment I stepped out beside him, flashes of light filled the air. Questions echoed from every direction. Reporters called his name. Business leaders approached to greet him. Through it all, Damien remained composed. One hand rested lightly at the small of my back as he guided me through the crowd. The gesture should have felt professional. Instead, it felt protective. Inside the ballroom, music drifted through the air beneath enormous crystal chandeliers. The room sparkled with gold and silver light. Hundreds of guests mingled across the polished floor. Damien was quickly pulled into conversations with investors, politicians, and executives. I expected to feel invisible standing beside people who lived in a completely different world. Instead, something unexpected happened. People wanted to talk to me. A retired senator introduced himself. A famous actress complimented my dress. A museum director asked about my dance studio. Everyone seemed curious about the woman who had suddenly become Damien Sterling's wife. As the evening continued, the attention only increased. Several younger businessmen approached throughout the night. They were charming, friendly, confident. One of them, a venture capitalist named Nathan Brooks, spoke with me near the ballroom terrace for nearly 15 minutes. We laughed about an awkward dance recital story from my teaching days. The conversation was harmless, easy, comfortable. Then I felt it. A strange sensation that made me glance across the room. My smile faded. Standing beside a group of investors near the stage, Damien was watching us. His expression remained calm, professional, unreadable. Yet something about his eyes felt different. Sharper somehow. More focused. Then Nathan smiled and extended a hand toward me. "May I have the first dance when the music starts?" Before I could answer, I noticed Damien set down his drink. And for the first time since meeting him, he did not look entirely in control. The music began moments later. A slow instrumental melody drifted through the ballroom as couples moved toward the dance floor beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Nathan kept his hand extended patiently. Around us, guests smiled and chatted while servers moved through the crowd carrying silver trays. Everything appeared elegant and effortless. Yet my attention remained fixed on Damien across the room. He was speaking with a group of investors, but something had changed. His focus no longer seemed entirely on the conversation. Every few seconds, his gaze returned to where Nathan and I were standing. "Olivia?" Nathan asked gently. I realized he was waiting for an answer. Embarrassed, I smiled. "Sorry. Yes, I would love to dance." He offered his arm, and together we walked onto the floor. The music wrapped around us as we joined the other couples. Nathan was an excellent dancer. Confident without being arrogant. Charming without trying too hard. The conversation flowed easily. We spoke about travel, business, and the unusual experience of growing up in New York. Several times I found myself laughing. Felt good to relax. To forget contracts and expectations for a little while. Then the song ended. I expected Nathan to thank me and return to his table. Instead, another guest approached almost immediately. "May I have the next dance?" he asked. Before I knew it, I was dancing again. Then again. The evening seemed to take on a life of its own. People wanted introductions, conversations, dances, attention. For years, my life had revolved around a small dance studio. Suddenly I was standing in the center of one of the most influential rooms in the city. It felt surreal. During the third dance, I glanced toward Damien. The sight nearly made me miss a step. He was no longer speaking with investors. He stood alone near the edge of the ballroom. One hand rested inside his pocket. The other held a glass he had not touched in several minutes. His expression remained calm, but the stillness surrounding him felt unnatural, like someone holding back a reaction. The realization sent a strange flutter through my chest. When the music finally paused, I stepped away from the dance floor and moved toward the terrace for fresh air. Cool evening wind greeted me as I stepped outside. The city skyline stretched endlessly beyond the balcony. Lights glittered across the river like scattered stars. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. "You seem popular tonight." My eyes opened immediately. Damien stood beside the terrace doors. I had not heard him approach. His tuxedo jacket remained perfectly pressed. His expression remained perfectly composed. Yet something in his voice felt different. Quieter. Sharper. I smiled lightly. People are being kind. His gaze shifted toward the ballroom. Some of them seem very interested in being kind. The comment caught me off guard. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined the edge beneath the words. Then he looked away toward the city. Silence settled between us. Finally, I folded my arms. I thought the contract said nothing about who I can dance with. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The reaction lasted less than a second, but I saw it. He exhaled slowly before answering. It does. I tilted my head. Then why do you look annoyed? His eyes met mine. For one long moment neither of us spoke. The city lights reflected in the gray of his gaze. Then, just before he answered, another man stepped onto the terrace and called my name. Then, just before he answered, another man stepped onto the terrace and called my name. I turned to see Nathan approaching with an easy smile. There you are, he said. Everyone is looking for the woman who stole the dance floor tonight. I laughed softly, partly from politeness and partly to break the tension that had settled between Damien and me. Nathan extended a hand toward me again. The orchestra is starting another set. Would you honor me with one more dance? The invitation sounded harmless. Ordinary. Yet the silence that followed felt anything but ordinary. I glanced toward Damien. His expression remained composed, calm, controlled. The same expression he wore in boardrooms, interviews, and public appearances. But after weeks of living under the same roof, I had started noticing the details other people missed. The slight tightening of his jaw, the stillness in his shoulders, the way his eyes sharpened whenever something bothered him. He looked directly at Nathan, then at the hand still extended toward me. The air between them seemed to change. Olivia is getting some fresh air, Damien said. His tone was polite, perfectly professional. Nathan smiled. Fresh air can wait another 4 minutes. I expected Damien to let the matter go. After all, he had been the one who insisted our marriage was only a contract. He had been the one who warned me not to develop feelings. He had been the one who repeatedly reminded both of us that emotions had no place in our arrangement. Instead, he took a slow step forward. Actually, he said quietly, I need a moment with my wife. My heartbeat stumbled. So did Nathan's smile. The words themselves were simple. Yet hearing Damien emphasize my wife created a strange warmth inside my chest. Nathan looked between us before offering a polite nod. Of course. A few seconds later, he disappeared back into the ballroom. The terrace became quiet again. The distant sounds of music drifted through the open doors. I folded my arms and turned toward Damien. What was that? He looked genuinely confused. What was what? I almost laughed. You know exactly what. The city lights reflected in his eyes as he looked away toward the river. You wanted an answer earlier. My pulse quickened. I had nearly forgotten. About why you looked annoyed? He nodded once. Silence stretched between us. Then he released a slow breath. Because I did not like watching them look at you. The honesty caught me off guard. I stared at him. He stared at the skyline. Neither of us moved. That sounds a lot like jealousy. A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth. It is not. I raised an eyebrow. Then what is it? For the first time all evening, Damien looked frustrated. Not angry. Frustrated with himself. I do not know. The admission felt more revealing than any confession. Before I could respond, his phone rang. The moment he looked at the screen, his expression changed. Business mode. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, he slipped the phone back into his pocket. We need to leave. I frowned. Now. Yes. The answer came immediately. Something about his tone made me stop arguing. 20 minutes later, we were back at the estate. The drive home passed in silence. Yet something felt different. The distance between us seemed smaller than before. As we entered the house, Damien paused near the staircase. For several seconds, he simply looked at me. Then he spoke quietly. There is something I should have shown you a long time ago. And for the first time since our marriage began, Damien led me toward the one room in the house that had always remained locked. And for the first time since our marriage began, Damien led me toward the one room in the house that had always remained locked. The hallway felt unusually quiet. Soft golden light stretched across the polished floors as we walked side by side. My heartbeat grew louder with every step. I had passed this door dozens of times during the past few months. Sometimes I had wondered what was inside. Other times I had convinced myself it was none of my business. Now Damien stood in front of it holding a small silver key. For several seconds he simply stared at the lock. The hesitation surprised me. This was a man who made billion-dollar decisions without blinking. Yet opening one door seemed difficult. Finally, he inserted the key. The lock clicked softly. The door opened. I stepped inside first. Then I stopped moving entirely. The room was not what I expected. It was not an office. Not a storage space. Not a private retreat. It looked more like a collection of memories. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Framed photographs rested on tables. Neatly organized folders filled glass cabinets. My pulse accelerated. Slowly I walked closer. The first photograph showed a community dance performance from 6 years earlier. I recognized it immediately. It had been one of my first public recitals as an instructor. Another picture showed a charity event where I had volunteered during college. Then, another, and another. My hands began to shake. Every photograph contained one thing in common. Me. Different years. Different places. Different stages of my life. The room seemed to spin slightly around me. Damien. My voice barely worked. He remained near the doorway. Silent. Waiting. I turned toward him. What is this? The answer took several seconds. The truth. The words settled heavily in the room. I looked back at the photographs. There were newspaper clippings about dance programs, flyers from charity events, articles mentioning the studio, even small details I barely remembered myself. Nothing looked obsessive. Nothing felt threatening. Felt something else. Something far more dangerous. Care. Years of quiet attention. Years of remembering. Years of noticing. How long? I asked softly. Damien lowered his gaze. Almost 7 years. My breath caught. 7 years. Long before contracts. Long before debts. Long before marriage. Why? The question came out broken. Damien moved toward one of the shelves. He picked up a framed photograph I had not noticed before. It showed a community center gymnasium decorated for a holiday event. Children stood in costume near a stage. I recognized it immediately. 7 years ago. One of my earliest teaching programs. Damien handed me the picture. Then he pointed toward the background. A young man stood near the back wall speaking with event organizers. My heart skipped. It was him. Younger. Less polished. But unmistakably Damien. You were there. He nodded. My company sponsored the event. Memories slowly returned. Children laughing. Music playing. Parents applauding. Hundreds of faces. Yet I had never noticed him. You helped a little girl who was too afraid to perform. His voice softened. Everyone else was focused on the audience. You spent 20 minutes helping one child believe in herself. The memory resurfaced clearly. A frightened girl standing backstage. Tears in her eyes. My chest tightened. Damien smiled faintly. She walked onto that stage because of you. Silence settled between us. Then he admitted the truth I already suspected. I never forgot that moment. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every mysterious gesture suddenly made sense. The greenhouse. The flowers. The studio. The protection. The concern. None of it had started with our marriage. It had started years earlier. I slowly looked around the room again. Then my eyes landed on a document resting alone on a nearby desk. My heartbeat instantly accelerated. It was a copy of our marriage contract. Except one section had been highlighted. And the highlighted date revealed something impossible. I stared at the page, certain I was reading it incorrectly. Then I looked again. The draft had been created almost 8 months before my father passed away. 8 months before the debts. 8 months before there was any reason for a contract marriage to exist. My pulse pounded so loudly I could barely hear myself think. Slowly, I lifted my eyes toward Damien. This was prepared before any of it happened. His expression remained calm, but I could see the tension beneath it now. The carefully controlled mask was beginning to crack. Yes. The answer barely sounded above a whisper. I looked back at the document. My hands trembled. Why would you prepare this before you even knew I needed help? Silence filled the room. For several seconds Damien said nothing. Then he walked toward the window overlooking the dark gardens outside. The moonlight cast silver shadows across the floor. He stood there with his back to me, as though the truth was easier to speak when he was not looking directly at me. Because I kept finding reasons not to approach you. My chest tightened. What does that mean? He released a slow breath. For 7 years I watched your life move forward. His voice remained steady. You were building your studio, teaching children, creating something meaningful. He glanced down at his hands. Every time I considered introducing myself, I convinced myself you were happier without me. The honesty hurt in a way I could not explain. Damien. He shook his head slightly. Then I learned your father was having financial difficulties. My heartbeat accelerated. You knew. Not everything. His eyes finally met mine. Only enough to worry. The room felt smaller, warmer, harder to breathe in. Damien stepped closer. I asked my attorneys to prepare options, business investments, sponsorship agreements, property purchases. He paused. The contract was supposed to be the last option. I stared at him in disbelief. You planned all of this? A faint smile appeared. Sud. Self-conscious. Almost embarrassed. Not the marriage itself. His gaze softened. I planned ways to stay close enough to help if you ever needed it. The confession settled between us. Every question I had carried for months suddenly had an answer. The greenhouse. The studio. The landlord. The protection. None of it had been coincidence. None of it had started after our wedding. It had started years ago with a man who noticed a dance teacher helping a frightened little girl backstage. Emotion tightened my throat. Why did you never tell me? Damien looked away briefly before answering. Because I did not trust myself. The answer surprised me. More than anything else he had said that night. You. He nodded. You saw a powerful CEO. A humorless laugh escaped him. I saw a man who had spent 7 years thinking about someone he barely knew. The vulnerability in his voice felt almost unreal. This was not the Damien Sterling the world knew. This was the man hidden beneath the headlines, beneath the power, beneath the walls. I took a slow step toward him, then another. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I stopped only a few feet away. And when you saw me dancing with those men? His jaw tightened immediately. The reaction answered the question before he ever spoke. I hated it. The words escaped before he could stop them. Silence followed. Then his eyes widened slightly. He had not meant to say it aloud. I felt my heart skip. Damien looked away, frustrated with himself. I told myself it was concern. His voice dropped lower. Then responsibility. Another pause. Then pride. Slowly he met my gaze again. The truth was written across his face now. Impossible to hide. Impossible to deny. And for the first time since I had met him, Damien Sterling looked like a man standing on the edge of a confession he could no longer keep inside. And, for the first time since I had met him, Damien Sterling looked like a man standing on the edge of a confession he could no longer keep inside. The room felt impossibly quiet. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows. The photographs surrounding us seemed to hold years of memories neither of us could ignore anymore. I stared at him waiting, not because I needed answers, because I already knew them. The truth had been hidden in every action, every sacrifice, every moment he had shown up before I even realized I needed help. Damien lowered his gaze briefly before speaking. The night we signed the contract, I told myself I was doing the right thing. His voice was calm, but I could hear the emotion beneath it now. I convinced myself that helping you mattered more than what I felt. My heart tightened. He smiled faintly. Then you moved into this house. A soft laugh escaped him, and every plan I had fell apart. The confession felt more intimate than any grand declaration could have been. I took another step closer. Neither of us looked away. Why? I asked quietly. Damien's eyes softened. Because you made the place feel alive. The answer settled into the silence between us. I thought about the breakfast, the greenhouse, the evenings in the library, the quiet conversations that slowly became the best part of my day. Somewhere along the way, the contract had stopped feeling like a contract. It had become something else entirely. Something neither of us had intended. Damien glanced toward the highlighted marriage agreement still resting on the desk. Slowly he walked over and picked it up. For several seconds he simply looked at it. Then he placed it back down. I hate that document. I blinked in surprise. You do? He nodded. Every day. The honesty made me smile despite the tears gathering in my eyes. Damien looked at me carefully. It protected you. His voice grew quieter. But it also gave me a place to hide. The realization struck me immediately. The contract had always allowed him to stay close without risking rejection. Without risking his heart. He released a slow breath. Olivia, I spent 7 years finding reasons not to tell you how I felt. His gaze never left mine. I am tired of finding reasons. Emotion tightened my throat. The room seemed smaller now. Warmer. As if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Damien reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. My pulse accelerated immediately. He removed a folded piece of paper. I recognized it instantly. The original contract. The very first version we had signed. He unfolded it carefully and stared at the pages. Then, without hesitation, he tore them in half. The sound echoed softly through the room. Then again. And again. Small pieces of paper drifted into the wastebasket beside the desk. I could only watch. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Completely unguarded. Completely honest. No more contracts. My heartbeat raced. Damien took one step closer. Then another. No more conditions. The distance between us disappeared. And no more pretending. Tears blurred my vision. Not from sadness. From relief. From finally understanding everything. For years he had been standing just outside my life. Quietly protecting it. Quietly believing in me. Quietly loving me. I smiled through the tears. Do you remember what you told me on my first night here? A look of recognition crossed his face immediately. Of course he remembered. Damien remembered everything. Yes. I laughed softly. You told me not to make the mistake of loving you. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Damien reached for my hand. His fingers wrapped gently around mine. Warm. Steady. Certain. The same way they had always been. He looked into my eyes and finally allowed himself to say the truth he had carried for 7 years. Then I owe you an apology. My heart nearly stopped. A faint smile touched his lips. Because I loved you first. And standing there among 7 years of memories, I realized some promises are worth breaking when they lead you exactly where your heart was always meant to be.